You're listening to From the Chair, and I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Join us each episode as we talk to athletic directors from across America. We're going to talk about topics like leadership, career development, issues of the day, and I can promise you we're going to have some fun along the way too. So sit back, listen in, and let's dive in. Let's go. All right, welcome into this week's episode From the Chair. It's a privilege today to have my longtime friend Scott Stricklin, the athletic director at the University of Florida, join us. Scott, how are you doing today?
Hey, Mike. Great to be with you, man.
Really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. Today, I'm gonna focus a little bit on two or three things, Scott. We're going to talk about career. We're going to talk about people. I think people matter to you. I know they matter to you, and they matter to me. And we're going to talk about people. And we're going to talk about. We'll probably end a little bit talking about SEC and just the college landscape today. But you've had an interesting and eclectic career in terms of the places you've been. Probably one of only a handful of folks who have worked at the number of SEC institutions that you've been at. Certainly, you had time at Tulane and Baylor as well, but graduate of Mississippi State, worked at Auburn, worked at Kentucky. Obviously back at Mississippi State as athletic director, and then now at the University of Florida as athletic director. In obviously a storied league, great competition in the league. I'm really kind of intrigued as you reflect back on your career. Let's call it the two or three, maybe three or four inflection points in your career relative to the schools that you were at, the things that you were able to say. You could, as looking back, you can say were informative to the job you're in now, and were impactful in terms of the job you're in now. We'll talk about the people relative to that maybe in a few minutes, but if you wouldn't mind, let's come off the top of that.
Well, that's you're going to make me think a little bit, because I've been really blessed and fortunate to be at great institutions. And what you find when you work at multiple places is, you obviously learn a little bit something new and different from each place, because every school has its own strengths and every school has its own challenges and some things that they do really well that you learn from, and then maybe some things that are not strengths that maybe you can you try to help them with if you have experiences in those areas. So it's hard to pinpoint anything in particular, but just from a career path, getting to go work for Mitch Barnhart at Kentucky, and you said we're going to talk about the people later on, but
yeah, sorry, go right in. Let's walk that way.
Getting in. I've been in media relations, sports information, media relations, communications, whatever the name was of whatever school, but I'd been at that throughout my career and had again worked with great people and had a lot of great experiences. But I got to Kentucky. Mitch had been AD for a year, and he's now been there 20 years. That gives you a sense of number one, his staying power, but secondly, where it was in that trajectory. And he had was kind of building his own team, and I was fortunate enough to be a small part of that. And because he had brought in so many really talented, young, hungry staff members, I got a chance to learn at a high level from people who were a lot smarter than I was, and that was just a great learning experience. Guys like Rob Mullins, who's now the AD at Oregon, Greg Byrne, now the AD at Alabama, Mark Coyle, and then just there's people who've stayed there. Jason Schloffer, who's heads up a lot of their external stuff. Just brilliant mind from a marketing perspective, and just so many talented people that you got a chance to be a part of there. And then I was still doing media relations work for Mitch. And then Greg Byrne became athletic director at Mississippi State and gave me the opportunity to get out of media relations and to more of a deputy administrative fundraising development role. So those were really probably the two biggest pivot points, if you will, that allowed me to have great learning opportunities and also maybe see a different path forward than just doing the traditional media relations role.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about Mitch, and I've on this podcast series, we've interviewed Rob, we've interviewed Dwayne Peavy, obviously Greg Byrne, a number of other guys, yourself now, Mark Coyle, and Mitch actually hired me at Tennessee and gave me a shot. So I'm curious, and he's a dear friend of mine personally, as I know he is of yours. So it was you were at a great place. So let's don't discount that, right? You were around great people. I just mentioned, rolled off, tongue of 6 or 7 that eventually became athletic directors off of that staff at one time or another. what do you think it is that you learned there? I mean, obviously you got to give Mitch credit for hiring really good people, right? But there's something in the water when you talk about the number of folks from that staff that have gone on to Power Five jobs. And let me back up for just a second. You could name a handful of folks like Joe Castiglione has had a lot of guys and ladies who've come through his shop that have gone on. Kevin White, Mike Alden. Certainly Mitch is right there with that group of people. And I've got my perspective on it, but my perspective today doesn't matter. I'm interested in your perspective on what that was about.
If I had to pinpoint one thing, it would be that Mitch hired people who had skill sets that complemented his abilities. You know, no matter how good someone is, we all have blind spots, we all have weak spots, and we need to surround ourselves with people who can help us in those areas we may not be as strong in. And I thought Mitch did a really good job of that. That the time I was at Kentucky, and then he let those people uh, do that, whatever their skill set involved. He let them do it, and didn't try to get in their way. Didn't try to take credit. Didn't try to if you know Mitch, he's the last guy to take credit, right? So he very much um, um, gave people the freedom to kind of operate in their sphere of influence. And, uh, you know, I think that's why, we all took ownership in what we did and learned, made mistakes from a management standpoint. But, Rob Mullins he was over the business office and was the deputy for the whole department. And he took that job very seriously, and he had ownership in the place as if he were the athletic director, even though he knew his role. Same with Greg Byrne from a development standpoint, and myself from a communication standpoint. And there was, you learn a lot from seeing how those other people operate in that role. So you get, I guess, you get talented people, you let them do what they do, but then they get a chance to learn not only from the boss and how he's managing a group of talented individuals, but you learn from one another. And I just remember I'd be in staff meetings, I'd be paying attention, and there were always things that I'd leave that meeting thinking, I got to get a lot better in this area because these other guys are really sharp in this area. And
Yeah.
so just, it was almost like getting your doctorate in college athletics, just being around really bright people who were, we were all young and hungry, and not necessarily ambitious, trying to make a name for ourselves, but we were trying to do the best we could for the University of Kentucky at that time.
Hmm. So you alluded to it. You had your career path early on was in the media and communications path, and that's look, communications, the ability to communicate is a critical piece of any kind of leader's success narrative, I think. Um, and then Greg gave you an opportunity to do some other things when he brought you to Mississippi State, your alma mater. But was there a point in was that the point in your career where you felt like, hey, maybe this can head down the path of eventually becoming an athletic director? Did you have desires relative to becoming an athletic director earlier in your career? Talk to that just a moment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I never really consciously aspired to being an AD. It just seemed like a long way off until being at Mississippi State and working for Greg, and the path became possible. Um,
Yeah.
not a given, but you could squint and maybe see a path how that might happen. I used to always think that if I was fortunate enough to be the number two guy at a really good school, that was going to be a pretty good life. And there are a lot of times when I, having been an athletic director now for 13 years, I still think that's a pretty good role to be in. I'm not sure it's not the best job in all of athletics in a lot of
I
ways,
know this.
but
Jay Jacobs says it is. He works for you now.
yeah,
He says it is. So, um,
there
yeah.
there's
So,
something
who
when you're
stands
in that
out to
number two
you?
chair.
And this is probably back to that maybe being a little unfair, but I told you I was going to riff off things a little bit. Is there a person or a couple people in your career that you worked alongside that you can really say, man, that person was a great communicator?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the guy who hired me at Auburn, David Housel, who came from the communication side, was obviously a legendary sports information director back when we called them sports information directors, and ended up becoming the athletic director there at Auburn while I was working for him. In fact, I think I was the last assistant SID that David that went to work for Auburn and David before he became athletic director. But he was really gifted in communication, not just from a what we all think of as PR, but he would write a column every in the game program, every football game program, every home game, and people would collect the game program just to read David's column. He's a published author, so he's just a great communicator with the written word as well. He would probably be the first name that comes to mind. But there was another guy at Auburn I worked with who became the SID after David was promoted. A guy named Kent Partridge. Kent is actually now the athletic director at West Alabama in Livingston, and Kent was totally different than David, but I picked up a lot of common sense wisdom about the communication role and how you interact, not just with the media but with coaches, from both of those guys, from Kent and David. So, and then I was never a fundraiser, so there's this whole group of current athletic directors that were probably one of the first generations that came up when being a development officer, coming up in fundraising was important. Mitch was one of those guys. Greg Byrne, John Curry, who you tutored, Chris Del Conte, Joe Castiglione, all those guys are the best of the best, but they all came up as fundraisers, and I never had really been exposed to that until I went to work for Mitch and was able to work with Greg Byrne there at Kentucky. I'd been around fundraisers, obviously, but I'd never been had the opportunity to really learn that part of college athletics and that part of the business. That's a totally different type of communication, but a lot of the skills translate. And I used to always, when I was learning the fundraising role, I remember thinking, as a media relations professional in college athletics, you have to be able to communicate a message. You have to be able to have difficult conversations, and you have to be able to ask people hard questions. And that's a lot of what fundraising is. I found out.
Yeah.
I didn't know it at the time, but that kind of prepared me. So, you're meeting with someone from Sports Illustrated, or someone calls and has an accusation against your department that you have to respond to from a media relations standpoint. You have to develop a message. You have to have difficult conversations. You may have to be the one to go in and tell your athletic director or tell a high-profile head coach, you're about to get hit with this, and this is how I think you need to respond. And they may have a different way they want to respond that's not the wise course, and you have to sit there and stand up and say, I think you ought to do this instead. And then you got to have difficult conversations. And I think of in fundraising, sometimes the difficult conversation, especially early on as a fundraiser, is asking people for money. The more you do it, the easier it gets. But so anyway, there's a lot of those communication techniques that I thought were transferable, and they just are different. You have different audiences, and you're kind of in different roles when you're presenting them.
Yeah. I just real quickly on Housel. Obviously, I had the chance to interface with him a lot during my time as athletic director in the SEC, and you'll never meet a more fine gentleman, right? I mean, the guy loved Auburn. And by the way, he's got a book out. His most recent book was something like Stories from the Back Booth or something like that, right? And it's just a great story. It's got a little politics in it, a little faith in it, but a lot of Auburn stories in it, a lot of SEC stories in it, and great communicators you alluded to. Even I've noticed recently on Facebook, Facebook friends, he's actually been asking people what they want to talk about, right? And then so he gets into conversation on Facebook, just a dialogue with people. Just a great guy. One of the guys, when you tell the story of the Southeastern Conference, David Housel's name will be in there. So you have great communication skills. I've always felt that. You have a strong following on social media. You've got over 80,000 Twitter followers. Part of that's probably because of where you are, and you've been in the league and 80 at two schools in the league. How do you decide? And reading your feed, most of what you tweet on a regular basis is acknowledgement of student athletes and teams, congratulatory, notions, that kind of thing. How do you view the use of Twitter as an athletic director in today's environment? Because, as you know, some ADs stray away from it completely. Some will answer a tweet during the middle of a game. Tell me your philosophy, if you would.
Yeah, my philosophy has probably changed as the longer we've had Twitter. I like gadgets. I was probably an early adopter when it came to Twitter, and did see it as a way you could, break down barriers and engage with people in a way that you may not otherwise be able to. And I always say that social media and Twitter is kind of like money. It's neither good nor bad. It's how you use it that determines if it's good or bad.
Yeah.
But I'm having a much more circumspect relationship with social media in general these days, and it's not criticism, that comes with it. It's the banality of some of the conversations that occur. Just the
Yeah.
it it I don't know that we're um, moving the public discourse forward in a positive, healthy way in social media, the way maybe early on it seemed like there might be a possibility to do so. So I am I am reassessing uh, my
Yeah.
view of how effective a communication tool social media is. Obviously, it's important. You've got to have a plan as a department. I'm just not certain that how important it is as individuals to do it. I will the way that it's really um, you can cut through a lot of noise, right? Back in the day, if Mike, when you were an athletic director, if you had a message you want to get out to your constituents, you had to write up a press release, or you had to call the local columnist and hope that he, conveyed your message appropriately and it got through. But you had to go through layers.
That's
And
right.
obviously, the great thing about social media is you can go directly to your audience. And so, from that standpoint, it's still healthy. I just it seems to bring out a lot of the craziers, at least much more so now than maybe it used to. And I use it primarily now just to consume information. I don't create conversation near as much as I once did in those platforms.
I think it's a great point, Scott. And the thing I'm not asking you for an answer to this. I'm mainly just talking off the top of my head based on what you just said. Communicating with your constituent base is still going to continue to be something that's important for a number of reasons, right? In time of crisis, or in the time when you're having success, you want to get that message out front. We are hiring a new coach, all those kind of things. And so I'm interested to watch the evolution of how that transpires over the next 12, 24, 36 months, because I do believe that in some ways Twitter has become much like you've articulated here, where somebody has a very it's become very opinion driven, right? And so I don't know what the answer to that is. There may be evolution of other social media channels. It may be that we go back to press releases. I'm not sure, but I do believe that there will continue to be the need to communicate with the constituent base, particularly when the in as your donor base, your season ticket holder base starts to skew to a generation that has become accustomed to that kind of communication. You got to figure out how you're going to deliver the messaging. And just as an offset here for just a second, one of the things I found interesting in our work is, and this, we have really drilled down on how do we hone our messaging very much more specific to individuals that we know are Gator fans or Bulldog fans or volunteer fans through the collection of data. And so you're not necessarily spewing it to all edges of the earth. You're focusing in on those that are on your website, and they're buying your merchandise, and they're making donations to Gator boosters, et cetera. So am I on the right track with that at all?
Yeah, there's no question. Understanding, having a purpose, I guess, as opposed to, I think early on in social media there was a novelty in communicating just because you could, right?
Yeah.
And now I think the point you're making is there's a chance to have really targeted, purposeful communications through these things in a way using data in a way where you're not carpet bombing people, but you're just being a little more strategic with it.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about you have two guys who are legends in their own right that are around your department. I know that they're not up in your business every day or anything like that, but yet they understand the Gators, and I'm sure you lean on them for advice or counsel from time to time. And they're two guys that you and I both know that are not necessarily short on opinion, and that's that's Jeremy Foley, who was the AD there for a quarter of a century, and then obviously the old ball coach, Coach Spurrier. Great guys personally, by the way. But how is your engagement with them as you come in from a different place? You've already been an AD in the league, and you know you have to understand the culture and you've been able to understand it from a different place, but now you're in the middle of it. Even though, look, we're talking 6 years in, so uh, give me that. But how are you using, or how do you use counsel and your relationship with Jeremy and Coach Spurrier to help you continue to understand what's important in Gainesville?
Well, I'm incredibly fortunate to have both of those guys still around and serving roles here in the department. Coach Spurrier is our ambassador, um, and Jeremy is our emeritus AD. They both have offices here in the department. They don't really keep normal office hours, by the way, just so you know, Mike, that it's something for all of us who are in this business to aspire to have that kind of setup. But I'm kidding. But they are, um, they are a wealth of information, and they're a great resource. Jeremy and I meet regularly when he's in town, and because he still keeps up with what's going on in college athletics, he keeps up with industry, and I I understand that there's a lot about both the University of Florida and college athletics in general that I still need help with in learning and understanding and just having different viewpoints. And Jeremy provides that. One of the great things about Jeremy is we get along really well. He's incredibly respectful of the fact that he's no longer the AD, and he did that. He made that choice on his own, and he always says that, hey, if I wanted to continue to be AD, I wouldn't have retired. Um, but we're great friends, but yet we look at things from very different standpoints often, vantage points. And so he's got a he'll tell you, he's a very old school approach, and obviously it served the Gators well. Probably the most successful athletic director in the history of the SEC if you look at championships won and overall success of the department. But he would also readily admit that some of the things we're dealing with today, that he doesn't know how he would handle that. When you talk about transfer portal and name, image, and likeness and all the stuff that's going on. But he still provides really good counsel. And the same thing with Coach Spurrier. Coach Spurrier obviously has, here's a guy who played here in the 60s, won the Heisman Trophy, coached here for a dozen years, sharp as a tack, and obviously still keeps up with what's going on in college football. So it's great to have those guys around. And I don't, it'd be a disservice. Any of us who are in college athletics, we're really undermining our own success and the success of our current student athletes and coaches if we don't take advantage of resources like a Jeremy Foley or a Steve Spurrier. I know when he was still living, Greg Sankey still called on Commissioner Slav, and I know he still calls on Commissioner Kramer, right? So I was at Mississippi State, and Larry Templeton was still around, who had been AD for 20 years. And, there's just something to be said for being able to tap into people who've been sat in the chair and understand some of the pressures and some of the challenges that come with that, and can offer a perspective that can be helpful.
I had worked at the University of Tennessee 11 years before I became athletic director, and my predecessor, mentor, friend, almost father figure was Doug Dickey. And a lot of people don't know this, but when he retired and became athletic director emeritus, he and I were also neighbors, like literally neighbors, like shared the same driveway neighbors. And he would come and maybe opine on subjects every now and then and ask me if I wanted some tomatoes and all those kind of things. And hey, I noticed this dog over in your backyard, that kind of stuff. But he never really, I would say, expressed opinions on my particular work. It was always to be there as a helper, right? The only time he really ever said anything, one day, I'll never forget, I came home, we had one of those AD meetings down in Birmingham, and we had voted on the tiebreaker system for divisional champs to play in the football game. And this was, I won't make this exactly what it was, Scott, but it's like the fifth tiebreaker. He was wanting me to go through every tiebreak scenario, and then the fifth tiebreaker came down, and he was kind of like, so now how did you vote on that? And I told him, and he's like, don't believe I would have done that, So he had those opinions, but he let me do my thing, right? And
right.
So having folks around that you can lean on that, I think is
It's
great.
so you mentioned the neighbor situation with Coach Dickey. Coach Spurrier is literally my across the street neighbor. Like, our front doors face each other. And I mentioned he had an office here in the building, but a lot of times the only place I see him is in our driveways. And that does it's a kind of a neat relationship because I can learn a lot about I learn a lot about the sport of football from 5 minute driveway conversations with Steve Spurrier because he certainly knows a lot of it. And he still loves talking about it.
I love it, man. All right, so there are a handful of athletic directors that have chosen to have as part of their senior team, other former athletic directors. Sean Eichhorst is at Texas with CDC, and Tommy McClellan is down the street here with Candace, and you've got Jay on your staff. Um, you know, I'm sure that they're, in addition to having worked with Jay in the league for a number of years, strategically speaking, what does that bring to your staff and to you personally as a leader to have someone who's also sat in that chair?
Yeah, Jay Jacobs was AD at Auburn for 13 years, and I first met Jay when I was working there. I mentioned when I was with David Housel in the mid '90s. Jay was a young assistant AD, one of these guys in charge of the car program or whatever, and then obviously later elevated to the athletic director role there. Um, Jay it's very similar to Jeremy, but from a different perspective, right? We all have the old saying, we're all looking at the same elephant, we just have a different view. And Jay has a different view of things than I do, but he has this the same experience. And um, what it's the most important thing when you're building a team is you get a group of people that are trying to do what's best for the department, right? So it's not necessarily somebody that's looking out for themselves, obviously, or somebody who's looking out just for me, but looking out for the department. And Jay understands that because he's been that role. He knows how important it is to have people like that around him. So he brings someone who can be honest and give you a perspective. We are incredibly fortunate here at Florida because I feel like we have 3 or 4 staff members who either were athletic directors or probably should be by now. Linda Teeler is also on our executive team here. She chairs the Division I Council and is probably as an accomplished of an athletic administrator as you can find. And I get the benefit of working alongside her every day. Chip Howard is another guy who's been here for a long, long time. He's probably responsible for every construction project that's happened here on campus the last 30 years. A lot of wisdom, just a good guy to be around, good culture guy. And each of those individuals, like Jay's case, he's been athletic director. The other two, if they wanted to, could probably go be one. And so I'm surrounded by brilliant people who, I don't have to make a decision on an island. I'm not, sitting alone on a mountaintop making a decision. I have really smart, creative people that I trust, in the foxhole, helping come up with decisions that need to be made and do what's best for the Gators.
Yeah. All right. So, as if the league wasn't hard enough, now come Texas and Oklahoma into the league to just enhance the stature of the league, and obviously, again, a couple programs that have won multiple national championships in multiple different kinds of sports. Um, Talk to me a little bit about you're having to get up every day preparing to win in a place like Florida, but the addition of these two schools, just your feelings on the two programs that are heavily resourced, and you're going to be competing against them every day, just like you have with the other schools that have been in your league for a long time. Your thoughts on the addition?
I think it's wonderful. It's, for one thing, I think both those leagues fit the culture of the SEC. And, you start looking across the landscape, and if, you play the parlor game of, who would be a good team to add to the SEC. Um, it's, it's a short list if you're saying who makes our league better, right? Who makes the SEC that already has all these great schools, great historical programs in it. Who can you go out and add that's going to actually add to that? And Texas and Oklahoma are on a very, very, very short list, and so the opportunity to bring those two schools in, I think, is really good. If we were worried about how hard the SEC is, we probably wouldn't have done that. But that's the goal is you want to make the league as strong as possible.
Yeah.
We have seen, for the last 30 years, as the SEC has kind of established itself as one of, if not the leader in college athletics from a conference standpoint, that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So we've shared revenue equally uh, for years because that's the culture of this league, and we understand that the weakest among us being strong is going to make all of us better. And so, um, no one in this league is backing down from competition. So I think it's great that they're joining us. I think it's going to be great for the fans. And you look at some of the matchups that we're going to be able to experience on a regular basis, not just in football. Obviously, there's going to be some unbelievable ones in football, but across all sports. To have our student athletes go to Austin and Norman, and then have Oklahoma and Texas student athletes be able to come on each of our campuses. And A&M is a great example. There's been they've been such a great addition to the league, and Missouri, and I'm not I'm not shutting them out, but just because Texas and Texas A&M are in the same state, just point out that A&M has come in, and they bring a lot to the table when they come on our campus, and our fans are excited to see them. And I think it's gonna be similar with Texas and OU. So it's anything we can do to make the SEC stronger is going to be good for the University of Florida and all the other schools in our league, and adding these two schools certainly does that.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. I've got a couple of questions left here, Scott. But one, just you made me think of this as we're talking about this. For a long time, the Gators never played football and non-conference games outside the state of Florida, or at least didn't venture very far away. And you've scheduled some matchups that kind of go out of the time zone and play in other states and everything. You obviously have a desire to do that. You have a reason to do that. Tell me, what led to you deciding that it was time to start playing some schools in some other regions?
Well, I know the Gators have, I think, been unfairly criticized. That is a nugget, that the Gators haven't played a regular season non-conference game outside the state of Florida since I think the early '90s. And the reason is we play Florida State every year, and so every
Yeah.
other year that's on the road, even though that's a non-conference game. If the state line had been drawn, the state line from Alabama had been drawn a little further south, that would be a non-conference game out of the state, but it's not. I
Yeah.
get it. And then we played Miami several times through the years. So there's the Gators have not necessarily shied away from competition, is my point, even though that is a factoid people like throwing out there. But we're opening up this coming season in September, going to Utah as part of the back end of a home and home, and it will be our first non-conference road game outside the state of Florida since I think '91 at Syracuse. So really, I believe we all need to play more high quality, high caliber matchups, and the economics for a long time did not encourage that. And by that I mean we could schedule 7 or 8 home games, play the SEC, play Florida State, and then pay some non-high profile teams come in here, and the fans would show up just the same. And we've seen in the last 5 to 7 years that's not what fans want to see. They want to
Yeah.
see high caliber matchups, and really that again, the economics allowed us to do that, but we really hurt our sport when we do that, in my opinion. And that's nothing against those programs that have been scheduled in that time, but um, people want to see good on good. They want to see teams of similar caliber go at it, and that's
It would probably help, by the way, with the expansion of the playoff in that regard. People maybe being willing to do more of that. Would you think?
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
It would, if the playoff committee would value overall quality instead of counting the number of losses, it would help even more. And I served on the committee, and that's a frustration I have, is that I know in that room they are really quick to point out if a team from a Power Five league has played a brutal schedule and already has 2 losses, they're gonna put a team from a weaker league that's undefeated ahead of them more times than not. And that's really frustrating, because I don't think we're really valuing, nor are we encouraging, really quality scheduling. And so we need to reward really good quality scheduling. And I know our fans are. I mean, we had a great sellout crowd when Utah came here this past year. We have Miami at a home and home in 24 and 25, and in future years we have Colorado and Arizona State, NC State. Just have variety. And so, in my mind, the perfect 12 game schedule is to play uh, 11 Power Five opponents, And I say Power Five. That's just that's an easy term, but high quality. I don't.
Yeah.
There are some non-Power Five programs that are high quality, but play 11 high quality, and then go play an FCS team. And I think that's smart budgetarily. I think it's what our fans want to see, and I think if every team at this level would do so, it would really benefit our sport across the board. We'd see better TV ratings. We'd see better attendance. That's what the players. Those are the kind of games our players want to play in. Our coaches want to play in them. And when what we have been doing for years was the equivalent of the Yankees playing 30 or 40 of their games against minor league teams during the season.
Yeah.
Because we were basically taking about 20%, 25% of our schedule and playing teams that weren't on our at the same level of resources and everything else. And I just don't know that that's good for the game.
Yeah. Well, hey, so look, I had two more questions, but in order for you to ever take my calls again, I'm going to not ask both of them. I'll just ask one, and we'll close out on this one. I'm curious. Your job is one that is, it's 365. 24/7, 365. You get asked to do things every day. You could be in an event. You could be with your student athletes. You could be with your coaches. You could be with your staff. Literally every hour of every day. You've got a family. Um, what do you do to find balance in your life to the extent you can, Scott? I mean, fortunately, you're in a business where you can bring your family alongside from time to time, but it's critical. The more the pressure builds in these jobs, you're speaking to your peers now. I mean, most of the listeners to this podcast are, staff members around the country, fellow athletic directors. How are you personally finding the space to recharge your own batteries, whether it's mentally, emotionally, spiritually, even your own professional growth outside of the norm? How do you prepare yourself to find that space, and what are you doing, or are you doing that?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And um, I had people I worked with early in my career who really encouraged that kind of balance to be a priority. We talked about David Housel. I remember David Housel once saying, when he was athletic director, either my schedule can control me or I can control my schedule, and I'm going to choose to control my schedule. That just always stuck with me. But ultimately, I can't, because you're exactly right. It would be so easy just to fill up 24 hours in a day with all the things reaching out for your attention. And at some point, you've got to draw lines and put barriers in place. And so, I been married for it'll be 30 years this summer. I have a great wife who's incredibly supportive. I have been able to bring my family along. So I encourage anybody um, who is in this profession, especially at a young age, as you have a family, find ways to take your kids to to the games on the weekends, or even the weekday nights if you can, conflict with school stuff. Have them be a part of it to the extent possible. Um, I don't know how anyone can survive in this business without a supportive spouse. And so I think having a rock star wife or husband, as the case may be, who understands the demands of the job and is supportive, is that I know I've greatly benefited from Ann and her understanding and approach to our life together in doing this. And then just I have not always done a great job of this. My daughters, who are both in college now, if they heard this podcast, they would probably throw a flag on what I'm about to say. But learning to put the phone down, and when you're not at work, and unplugging and disconnecting to the extent you can, is something. I'll put it this way: if my daughters are listening, something I could have always done better at, and I'm trying to make that a priority. But it's there's a reason the good Lord gave us a Sabbath, is because He wanted us to have time away from the duties and tasks that are before us. And if we're not careful, we're gonna put yourself in a bad spot if you don't step away from time to time on a regular basis.
Yeah, and look, Beth, so you'll understand, and appreciate what I'm getting ready to say. She told me one time, I got into a habit for a while there where I might call and leave a message to my senior staff at 10:30 at night, and it usually was related to putting a marker down for something I wanted to talk about the next day. But she would always say, "Hey, Mike, when you call John Curry at 10:30 at night, he thinks because you're the athletic director, you want an answer." and then that discombobulates his world with Mary Lawrence and his family. And so, part of your being example is to be a good leader for your staff. You know, oh, just like stab me in the heart a little bit, right? But
Right.
I started to learn how do you best do that, because as leaders we have to exhibit good leadership in the course. It's funny. Mark Harlan's interview that we did on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and I'm not suggesting this is the right thing for everybody, but he said because of the number of young people that work, just lots of hours at these weekend games, they've started giving some of their staff Mondays off because if they've worked events all weekend long. And so we have to learn how we're going to evolve for the future, relative to workflow is just different in today's world. So
That's a great idea, by the way, that Mark gave you. I To that point, I've not always done this, but here in the last few years, I have stopped myself from sending a weekend text or email for the very reason you just mentioned. Don't cause stress or um, work for somebody, because we all have really good people working for us, right? And they want to be successful, and they want to do what's being asked of them, and they're not. To your point, if you send a reminder text on a Saturday afternoon, they're going to be thinking about it for the next 36 hours till Monday morning, and that's not
yeah.
healthy for them either. That's really good advice.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, I'll let you off the hook. I was going to ask you about the future of the NCAA, so we won't talk about that on this call. Uh,
Hey, I appreciate you not asking that, because I would not want to have to be deposed, and I have some thoughts and ideas that attorneys would probably like to get a hold of. But we've got to. I'll give you a 15-second answer, which is we need to understand we don't live in a world of idealism. We live in a world of realism, and
yeah.
we need to be willing to look at a world that may not have existed in the past, and figure out a way to make that work.
Amen. That's a good way to end on. Yeah. Look, I knew this would be a good conversation. Obviously, there's a lot more we can talk about, and we'll talk about offline at some point. So, I really appreciate you sticking with me here today, Scott, and giving me the time.
Hey, Mike, I appreciate it, man. You're one of the greats of this business, and I mean that. Great friend, great example, and consider you someone I've always looked up to. So thanks for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, great. All right, folks, you've been listening to From the Chair. I'm Mike Hamilton, your host, and today's guest has been Scott Stricklin, the Director of Athletics at the University of Florida. We appreciate you listening each and every week, and we'll see you next time.